All right, we're back. Another episode of Jack of all trades. Thanks for joining us with Jack here at Jack Viking on Twitter. I'm your host, Gates Haug at First Gator on Twitter. Today we're going to dive into some NFC North analysis, Jack. We're going to take a look at some information on 538, a lot of knowledge on there with some really good inputs. Jack, let's dive right in. What are some of the things you're taking a look at? Let's say go over the last 5 years. If I want to compare Bears and Packers, Vikings and Lions and things like that. What's something? What are you taking a look at here?
Well, there's like we talk about models for predictive models, and that's a good way to judge how good your team is, versus what I would say where people say win-loss records. Like we all know, like to me, the win-loss records are what they are. Like how useful are they? Somewhat, but everyone knows to go look at the standings. Everyone knows, but there's as a fan, you'll get to think like, I think we were better than that, and we deserve more wins. And I think a lot of that can be just as a fan, to where you just say what you want it to be or think. So that's why I like models and evaluating things predictively. Is like, how good are you? Like how good, because these predictive models have shown to be right at predicting the future better than coin flips, better than win-loss records. I mean, that's where it really gets down to it, is that if you made your predictions based on who has a better record, and you competed with the guy who made his predictions on who has a better 538 score or a better DVOA score, the guy using the predictive model is generally going to beat the guy who just uses wins and losses.
Right. That makes sense. So we'll take a look at the Lions, Vikings, and Bears. Oh my! We're gonna switch over to your screen so we can share that with the viewers here and get a little closer look at some things we're trying to talk about here for just so you can have a look at. Well, there I am. You can take a look at these numbers right on the website. It's going to be 538, and we're also going to be pulling up Jack's spreadsheet again and do a little bit of walkthrough on comparing the numbers to what has happened over, like we said, the last 5 years, and see if we can take a look at the comparison here. And so, Jack, you have your 5-year actual DVOA column right up there, marked in the coloring. Graphs over here. What are we seeing here?
Okay, so just simply, this is a 5-year DVOA average, and by DVOA, it's not the actual DVOA; it's what your DVOA score, which is an efficiency, what that implies for winning. So if Green Bay has implied a 9.06 wins per season over the last 5 years, if we use a DVOA model, Detroit 6.64, Minnesota 9.88, and Chicago 7.46. So
I have a question for you. So what does DVOA actually stand for? Is there some abbreviation for something?
Yeah. So instead of if I go to, this is, by the way, this is from Football Outsiders, and
Okay.
So DVOA is defense adjusted value over average. So it's it's like it's an efficiency of production, and it's like how good you are if your number's positive, and how bad you are if your number's negative. And so this has 2019 up here, and as you can see, like Baltimore, New England, Kansas City, New Orleans, San Francisco, Dallas, Minnesota, those are like the good teams, and those are the best teams based on this DVOA formula. Now, if you go, if you go on to Football Outsiders, it says explained further here if you want to really get into it. But if you go down to the second page, this is where they have an estimated wins based on DVOA. So that's where I like to look. And for last year, it's just, New Orleans and Baltimore, 13, 12.8, 12.3, 12.1. And they line up pretty well with average, with actual wins. And they spent, like we talked about it in a previous show, they, over any long period of time, they come out, they do really well. And then So that's basically what DVOA is. And like I said, the short answer is it's an efficiency model.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
So, and so what I kind of wanted to show is what I really like at 538 is I like to go into their team historical historical value for every team, and they do it like in a week by week thing, and they even tell you like the score and who you beat. But it's a really nice vision where I can use the bottom to kind of slide in the time period. And so here I've done 2015 through 2020, or 19. So it's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, those 5 years. And you can get a running idea of how teams progressed, through each season, and then how the next season progressed and the next season. And then like here we overlay Minnesota and Green Bay, and you get kind of a running total of how the 538 model valued Minnesota versus how they valued Green Bay. And you can see the periods of time where Green Bay was better, then Minnesota was better, then Green Bay, then Minnesota for quite a long time up until the very end of the last year. They had them a little bit better, whereas we look and DVOA ended up having Minnesota a little bit better. So it's close, and you in both areas, you're like, okay, Minnesota was 7th, Green Bay was 10th, and then on this one, Green Bay was a little bit ahead of Minnesota. So, and I think most people would agree that Minnesota and Green Bay were pretty close last year.
Yeah, game or two, right?
Yeah, I mean, both they played twice. The games were fairly close. I mean, the Vikings were leading late at home and lost, and they were first and goal on the road to and through an interception. So the close games.
Yeah, right. Real close. So we're looking at the Packers and the Vikings right here, being very similar, like you say. And then now if we could switch, maybe take a look at Minnesota, and let's go with the Chicago Bears in this instance. We do the same 5-year time span, and
Yes.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So on DVOA, it's pretty obvious. If you're just looking at a 5-year average, Minnesota is over 2 games better than the Bears. Yeah. So that's just, and as a fan, I'm a fan. So I have trouble. I see everything with the color purple. So I think this is a good way to check yourself, and it's also a good way to when if you're on Twitter arguing with a Bear fan, you can kind of go back to like, if it comes to like the last 5 years. Now, if you want to talk about next year, then that's more variable, unpredictable, and what makes it fun. But if you're just looking at the Bears versus the Vikings, DVOA, the Vikings really good over that average. And then if you look at the points-based model of 538, you can see the purple line is over the orange line almost the entirety of the 5 years. It was the second half of 2018 where the Bears had their great season and went 12-4. And they finished well ahead of the Vikings. But then last year, somewhere early in the season there, about week 6, the Vikings overtook them again. So there's really just that few weeks there from 2018 for about a season. The Bears had it better, but if you go back the 4 years previous, and that's just the points illustrated on 538, and then the DVOA illustrates it over here, and it just gives you a good idea of where the two teams stack up.
Sure. So, good way to look at the past 5 years here. Do you want to go through if we go?
Yeah, I'll go through Detroit here.
Yeah,
similar story. Detroit hasn't been a good team. There's almost on 538. There's just a couple little instances where Detroit was considered slightly better than the Vikings, but other than that, and then obviously if you go over and look at your 5-year DVOA, the Vikings are 3 games better on average than Detroit. Okay. Detroit hasn't been good. It's pretty much that simple. Matter of fact, it'd probably be more fun to look at.
I was thinking Bears Lions.
Yeah, so if we go to Bears Lions,
yeah,
Interesting there is on the points-based model of ELO that 538 uses. There's a really good stretch where they like the Lions slightly better. They had the Lions as a pretty average team from 2015 to 2018. And then the Lions dipped a bit when the Bears had their big updraft. And then last year, as the Bears crashed back to 500, the Lions really crashed with that, and that was Matthew Stafford getting hurt. So the Lions have been kind of a close to average team for 4.5 years with Stafford, and that ain't great. But then they lose him, and it gets real bad. I personally like the Lions to recover because you just by looking at this, it makes sense that hey, you get Stafford back, you're more of this average team, and if they can get a little luck, a little better coaching, maybe some of these draft picks hit. I don't think it's a far cry. The Lions could just stick their head up and play a little bit. So, not that I really hope for that.
Get their quarterback. They got new coaching, still trying to get everything built and put in place. Obviously, they're, just what do you do? You're the Lions, but this is a great way to look at it. What I like to see is because I'm not I'm not a Bears fan. I'm not a Lions fan, but to take a look at this specifically, I was kind of shocked to see the Lions spending that much time over the Bears just on this graph. It was kind of shocking to me. So I think it's a good way to look at it from a neutral perspective. You're just looking at the numbers, not what goes on in my head. I'm like, well, the Bears, they've been better than the Lions, obviously, you would think, but not necessarily the case in the last 5 years, it looks like. But so you want to do more analysis on Packers Lions, or is that
I mean,
blowout?
You can kind of get an idea of. It's kind of funny that the Packers were so good in like 15 and 16. They stayed. And the Lions had their moments back then, and they stayed pretty much ahead of them. But then with the Rodgers injuries and those dips, this is a period where for 2 years the Packers dipped to average, and the Lions were pretty average then. So these lines are pretty equal. But then basically last year, the Lions were one of the worst teams. The Packers were one of the best teams. So you have a huge difference. And then at the first year of this 5-year window was, the kind of the tail end of the Rodgers, McCarthy, NFC title type, consummate good team, healthy Rodgers, and the Lions were below average team. So there's a good chunk at the beginning and end of this 5-year window where the Packers were way better than the Lions. And that's how you get over here at DVOA. You get a 9.06 and a 6.64. So it looks pretty dominant for a 5-year average. But for 3 of those 5 years, they were pretty even teams.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's our breakdown. We're taking our breakdown of the models and looking at the DVOA numbers a little more in depth, showing that to you today. We're going to do some more NFL analysis down the road. But for now, thank you for tuning in, and be sure to tune in next time on Jack of All Trades.
Hey, you there?